This video is sponsored by Microsoft. The leading tourist attraction in Barcelona, visited by nearly 5 million people last year, is the Basilica de la Sagrada Familia. Begun in 1882, the church remains unfinished. If all goes according to plan, the last and tallest of its spires will be topped out in 2026. Decoration of the exterior, however, will likely continue until at least 2034. In a world where skyscrapers and stadiums can be finished in a few years, Sagrada Familia's decades-long construction schedule is the stuff of legend. But before modern machinery and methods of finance, large construction projects often took centuries to complete. Few medieval cathedrals, for example, were finished within the span of a single lifetime. Chartres Cathedral owes the famous harmony of its design to the remarkable speed, only a quarter century, with which it was built. St. Paul's in London, topped out in 35 years, was almost unique in being supervised by the same architect, Christopher Wren, from beginning to end. These, however, were exceptional. Much more typical were Notre Dame in Paris, under construction for nearly 200 years, or the York Minster, which took about 2.5 centuries to complete. Some cathedrals were under construction far longer. The Duomo of Milan, the world's third-largest church, was begun in 1386. Under the autocratic patronage of Duke John Galeazzo Visconti, nearly half the building was completed in only 15 years. Under the Duke's successors, however, progress stalled. The central cupola was only built at the beginning of the 16th century, and it was not until 1577 that enough of the nave was completed for the church to be consecrated. The facade was cobbled together over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries, and finished on the orders of Napoleon, who offered to pay for it, but never followed through. Decoration of the exterior, which eventually featured no fewer than 2,245 statues, continued until 1965, 579 years after work started. The construction of Cologne Cathedral began in 1248. Work started on the eastern end, where the main altar would be located. The apse and choir were completed in the 14th century, and the lower parts of the nave and aisles in the 15th, when the south tower reached about a third of its intended height. Then, work stopped. For nearly 300 years, Cologne's skyline was defined by a huge wooden crane poised motionless on the stub of the cathedral's south tower. When construction finally resumed in the early 19th century, it was sponsored by the Prussian government, which agreed to pay about a third of the immense cost. Thereafter, the building rose steadily, following the original plans, but using modern tools and techniques. The last stone was laid in 1880, 632 years after the first. Leaving aside utilitarian structures, such as defensive walls and levees that have been frequently rebuilt, and complexes like Stonehenge or Karnak Temple that grew up over the centuries, the longest construction projects on record are the colossal temples of ancient Greece. The Temple of Apollo at Didyma was begun during the reign of Alexander the Great. Despite delays caused by Galatian raiders and a pirate attack, work continued steadily. The Stela, its walls so high and thick that they would later be repurposed as a Byzantine castle, was completed in the 2nd century BC, and the first of the planned 122 columns rose in the same period. Work went on through the Roman imperial era, finally grinding to a halt with only 72 columns in place, more than 6 centuries after it had begun. The foundations of the temple of Olympian Zeus at Athens were laid around 520 BC by the tyrants Hippias and Hipparchus. On account of its colossal size, roughly 4 times that of the Parthenon, progress was slow, and only a few columns were erected before the tyranny was overthrown. The site remained untouched until the 2nd century BC, when King Antiochus IV resumed construction. His Roman architect proposed a design with 104 Corinthian columns, but before more than a handful had been raised, Antiochus died. During Sulla's sack of Athens, some of the partly completed temple's columns were dismantled for transport to Rome. Construction resumed briefly during the reign of Augustus, but it was only under the sponsorship of Hadrian that construction was completed, about 650 years behind schedule. The Temple of Hera at Samos, started around 530 BC, was meant to be the greatest of all Greek temples, with no fewer than 155 towering columns. Construction proceeded in fits and starts through the classical and Hellenistic periods. Columns were added as funds became available, the material and style varying with the period. During the Roman era, the cult statue of Hera was moved into a small shrine in front of the temple. The main building, however, was never completed and remained scaffold-shrouded and roofless until the mid-3rd century, when a band of Goths ransacked the sanctuary and put an end to 800 years of very gradual progress. Although it was only under construction for a fraction of the time required to complete some temples and cathedrals, the most notorious long-running construction project in European history was St. Peter's Basilica. Begun in 1506 by Pope Julius II, the church was completed in 1626, and decoration of the interior continued for decades more. The pace of building was less controversial than the cost, about 47 million scudi, equivalent to tens of billions today. The splendor of the basilica can now be appreciated in unprecedented detail thanks to a partnership between Microsoft and the Vatican. Using AI and photogrammetry based on more than 400,000 high-resolution images, this project is intended both to digitally preserve St. Peter's and to make the basilica's rich history and architecture accessible to all. An in-person exhibit will open at the Vatican in early 2025. In the meantime, you can visit a digital twin of St. Peter's Basilica through an interactive website. As I explored this model, I was repeatedly surprised by details I had never noticed. For the first time, I could look closely at the mosaics of the cupola with their gilded assembly of angels and saints. Far below, the chapels and excavations beneath the high altar are revealed in spectacular detail, down to the Roman graffiti around the traditional site of Peter's tomb. After years of touring and reading about St. Peter's, I can say without hesitation that the Microsoft-powered digital model is the most important resource ever created for studying and understanding the Basilica. Do yourself the favor of following the link in the description and see St. Peter's as never before. The next episode of my Rome in Review series, exclusively on Patreon, explores the 1963 film Cleopatra. To be sure you don't miss it, sign up on Patreon, linked in the description. As mentioned in last week's announcement, I am leading groups to Italy and Turkey in 2025. Visit my trips page, also linked in the description, to learn more. Finally, for more Told in Stone content, check out my other channels, Scenic Routes to the Past and Told in Stone Footnotes. Thanks for watching.